So tonight I wanted us to talk primarily about emotional regulation and how we can be better at that. And as I was doing research and coming up with ideas, one of the things online was the title was basically how to not be triggered, or how to deal with being triggered in a world that is constantly triggering us. And while I think that might be, I think we'll touch on that. And I would like for Bob and Jasmine, especially our two counselors, to, when we get to y'all, define what real triggering is. Because I want to start by saying a lot of people use that word and that's not what they're talking about. I think that's one of those overused words, like everything's a trigger, and it's not. But I do think what we're really getting at is the unfathomable stimuli that we are bombarded with all the time. And the ways in which that distracts, the ways in which that is producing new levels of anxiety and discomfort and disconnection. And so I do want to talk about, triggers and what they really are and what possibly to do with them, because I do think it's related to this. But I wonder if you think about your emotional, spiritual, your life. Do you have responses that are overreactions? And are they a result of a lack of emotional regulation? And so I've been sort of all over the place with this and thinking about what is causing. It seems like there's a greater degree of neurological issues, disorders. There's a greater degree of anxiety and depression. Perhaps, I don't know. I'm not saying this for sure. I think this is the way it seems to me. It seems to be a greater degree of obsessive compulsive kind of behaviors, ADD, and any number of other things, which of course I think leads to what I feel like is a less humane world that we live in. And I do feel like the internet, social media has just increased the volume of noise, volume of content, volume of stimulation, where we're dealing with so much. And I think it's increasing this underlying anxiety, and at this sort of fevered pitch that most things are, I feel like we can react and be very quickly be drawn into a behavior maybe that we don't want to be. As I was looking at this, something came up, and I really want to hear y'all's reaction to this. I'll give you my take on it, and then really want y'all to weigh in. But there's a book out, and I think it must be pretty recent, where the person is arguing that when it comes to right brain and left brain processing, and that we essentially are so locked in, so engaged, so on all the time with our logical, analytical, gaming, figuring side of our brain, that our creative brain doesn't get, our hemisphere doesn't get to do what it needs to do, that focus, that engagement, that quiet. And my understanding, and this is where I want y'all to really weigh in, my understanding is the whole um, right brain, left brain has been pretty much debunked. A lot of the science says that's not true, that we have, you can't separate the hemispheres. You can't separate logic and art or creativity and math versus music or whatever. It's not that simple. And we don't really have, each of us might be dominant in a way that we lean towards, say, creativity or logic or math or whatever, but it's not, you can't divide our brain and say that's what's really happening, is that, oh, I'm a left brain person, you're a right brain person. So that would mean the sort of underlying argument of the book is built on a fallacy. But I do think there's something to us always being jacked into the matrix and having this, being inundated all the time, that means we don't get any quiet, we don't get any space, we don't get any peace. And so therefore it is a lot easier to react, overreact, to respond in ways that are, I think, unhealthy. When this happens, I think there's a number of things we can do to address it. But I believe a better approach would be to try to have a lifestyle that prevents it from happening for the most part. If my initial reaction is an unhealthy one, is an overreaction, is harmful, and the quicker I correct myself, the better. And Jasmine and I, in an interpersonal relationship, there are times when I have to say, I'm sorry, I was short, or I was snippy, and I may even say, this is why I think I was, I'm sleep deprived and haven't eaten or whatever. Not as excuses, but try to figure out. But I think it's possible to live in such a way where those happen less often, and that we don't have so often where we have to make a correction afterwards, where we can prevent it from happening to begin with. And that has always been sort of my approach to life, to raising my children, to parenting myself, is to try to avoid things rather than deal with them once they happen. I think so you could say that when I'm feel like I'm getting, and I'm going to use the word triggered, and I'm using it in the wrong way, I think, or inappropriate way, or insufficient way. But I definitely could turn to breathing, slowing down and connecting with my breath. I could look for some space, maybe literal physical or psychological, mental space. I could question what's really going on. What am I really feeling? Does this have anything to do with that other person, or is it something in me that's happening? I could try to, in a I am the thinker, not the thoughts way, or in an IFS way, be the observer, the self, the soul that is observing what's happening. And so that creates space to step back a little bit and see what's really going on. And I can do all this without judgment, with genuine curiosity, and say, why did I respond this way? All of those things are great. But if I can prevent it from ever happening, I think some of these things are going to be a lifestyle that will prevent them from happening. And I feel like biggest thing, the most important thing is love. If I am living a love-centered life and I feel like I am surrounded by love, I am receiving love, it's flowing through me, I'm giving love, I'm living in love, I I really believe that brings security and safety. I believe that brings peace and calm. And if I'm responding in love, then I'm not going to be responding in some of the ways that I've been mentioning. And so a big part of our practice of love, of being able to receive love, and is this slowing down? Is this breathing? Is this mindfulness of being present? And the book that I said I feel like has the sort of a faulty premise, underlying premise, but I feel like the argument is true that if I never disengage, if I'm always racing, stimulated, input, then I'm not really present. I'm not really here with you. I'm somewhere else. Or I have, the motor is running in different ways. So I feel like mindfulness, presence, love, breath, observing, compassion for myself and others gets us to a better place of not being so quick to react in ways that lack emotional regulation. But what the fuck do I know? What do y'all think?
Number of things come to mind. And what you were just the number of different paths that you took reminded me of some recent sessions I've had, reminded me of my own session recently. It reminded me of my visit with my parents last week. You know, um, uh, and I guess conceptually, how I present it to folks, how I understand it, is this idea that we all have a window of how much we can tolerate. Some of us are much more sensitive, and our window is smaller. Some of us have had certain trauma or challenges, and our window is smaller. But we've all got a window, right? And when different things happen, when we have a loss, when we have financial issues, when we have challenges in our relationship, that window gets smaller until the window closes, right? And when our window closes, that's when we, so to speak, flip. And this, another little image, this very simplified, we've got our upstairs brain that is our rational reasoning evolved human brain. We've got our downstairs brain that is our mammalian fight flight brain, and then we have our basement brain, which is our reptilian shutdown to stay safe brain. So hopefully we're functioning here, but when our window closes, we go into fight flight. We flip our lid and we go into fight flight. And from a IFS parts approach, when my window closes and I lose clarity, I have some part or parts or memories that come in and take over. And no longer am I perceiving and experiencing the present. The past is present. When I go here, the past becomes present. And what part or parts of me are perceiving that? And how are they then reacting to it? And so the kind of the getting the lid back on is about what we do kind of from an IFS language or IFS approach is, as I'm talking to somebody, we start kind of noticing what kind of voices, not that they're hearing, but whose voice is coming out. Is that a voice of a teenage you? Does this remind you of, a situation at work? Who's talking? And as we start noticing who's talking, then we can begin having that observer that Michael spoke about, that we actually call a self-like part. It's not actually self, it's self-like. That kind of observer is able to start noticing and reflecting. We can start getting our lid back on, and we can become unblended. And so all the different layers of lenses go away. And so last week, my whole family, we drove to see my folks, and I've seen them a couple times here in the last 5 months because my dad's been having some different health challenges. And I there's nowhere else that I get more activated and triggered than when I'm with my folks, primarily with my mom. And she's my primary caregiver. I've been with her since day one, and she's got her stuff that she's passed along to me. And if I were to try to map it out or write about it, I can't imagine how many parts of me started piping up, during the 4 days that I was there, right? And I know I was here. I know I left here. I know I had my coping mechanisms or protectors on high alert. I was eating a bunch of junk, I was sleeping in. I was zoning out a lot on my phone, all those different kind of, we call them protectors or distractors, that is about not being present, which is what you're alluding to, Michael. So that's, I guess I'll wrap up kind of my sense of looking at what a trigger is, right? And a trigger is when some past thing becomes present in one way or another. Those lenses come on. What was the other? Regulation is about coming back and first listening to everything that's inside of me, creating some space, and then being able to come from clarity, which, ain't easy. That's all I got for now.
I feel like I've seen like 5 different things that are causes of triggers, and myself dealing with the stuff that I've dealt with, and trying to get over being triggered, and other people I see. And unresolved trauma that Bob just talked about is a big thing, where you have these things that are triggered from past things. And I had that. I saw a friend, my neighbor in college, was murdered, and he was dating my girlfriend's sister. And we walked over there when we came back from a trip and found them with their hands bound behind their back, and their brain had been blown out, so there's blood matter all over the place. And there was years where, like, I couldn't see ketchup. I'd go to the chicken wing place and they put ketchup on a plate, and I'd about get sick, and it'd make this whole feeling come over me. And that took a while to get over. And that was a very specific trigger that was from a very terrible trauma. But the biggest ones I see are people getting attached to outside things. And I think politics and religion are really easy to say that. If the person doesn't have your political view or your religious view, if they don't support that, that becomes part of your identity. And anytime you feel like your identity is attacked, you tend to lash out and act irrationally. So kind of decoupling from those external identities, I've found, helps that. And I was that way. I was a radical right-wing person, then I was a radical left-wing person, and now I'm just kind of, none of it makes sense anymore at all. I'm aware of everything, but it's not triggering like it used to be because it's not part of my identity anymore. I just let it happen. And then the other one I saw was there was behaviors in other people. Like, if you would see somebody judging somebody, you'd be like, oh, that person's so judgmental. But it was because I was judging people too. So I would get triggered by certain people because they had behaviors that I didn't realize I had. I saw it in them, but didn't see it in me. And I would just, hate to be around that person. So that was one. And then Another one I see, and this is big on social media, is people like you'll judge somebody as less than because they're living the life you wish you could. Like seeing all these influencers, a lot of people get upset and they talk bad about these influencers because that's not a real job. They're just, doing this for money. Yes, but they're having a good time. They're having a good life. They're traveling. They're doing whatever. They rub people the wrong way because they have the life that they would like to have, but are too scared to actually manifest that. So they get triggered on all these different people. And that's where social media really comes in because you have a lot of people that you can hate, some for good reasons and some for bad reasons. And then the last one I saw is expectations. And this is one I think that is really triggered in family is you, especially as you change, you kind of feel like other people should grow with you or act the same they've always been or be a certain way that you expect them to be. So we expect people to act like we think they should act or how we act instead of having grace and understanding that they're their own person and trying to understand how they came to where they are and why they actually are acting the way they are. And a lot of times their stuff is from unresolved trauma and some of these other things that makes them act a certain way. But when it's outside of our way, you tend to get upset because they're not doing exactly what you want them to do or expect them to do.
I think you're muted.
Yeah, I was making sure Joel was quiet in our tiny house where we are for just a little bit. Had a number of thoughts, so I'll try to speak clearly, in a way that's understandable. But I think it's perhaps an oversimplification of the term trigger. But I think one way to look at it, a trigger is something that activates our most instinctive survival, response. And so a lot of times it's in some way a perceived threat. One of the modes of therapy we're encouraged to use because it's evidence-based is cognitive behavioral therapy. So you are helping someone to identify the thoughts that then produce feelings and cause your action. And so especially with our younger kiddos, you look at the action and help them dial it back. Well, what were you feeling when you did that? And then there's some underlying belief that results in that response. And I think regardless of our age, but particularly perhaps as adults, when we're talking about those past, bringing the past into the present, things that, if like, for example, in a relationship, things that have been hurtful and caused areas of insecurity from a past relationship in a present relationship, something that transpires and it arouses those feelings of insecurity. And so it's a matter, I think, of one way of being present is to identify those thoughts that we have, those beliefs, or those parts of us that have, like Bob spoke of, the they have the altered view or a different perception, and changing those thinking fallacies, so that as we change our thoughts, then we feel a different way and we respond a different way. And I do think whether the book you spoke of is completely accurate or not, I do think there's so much about our lifestyle now that there's a variety of stressors that I think we take for granted. We're just accustomed to.
Yeah.
When I think of, for example, my grandparents, my maternal grandmother was an immigrant who never finished high school, not even an equivalency diploma. She had the equivalent. She had basically an 8th grade education in a one-room schoolhouse and went to work in factories and worked for one company from her teenage years till she retired at 65. And she did better in retirement than I've yet to achieve as a person with a master's degree. And that's just 2 generations ago. It's a very different lifestyle and a very different way of living as a society. However you feel about minimum wage and, income inequality, to me, it's different when a 1 or 2 person household with high school or basic education can be assured of a job that provides food, provides stable housing, allows for vacations and times to to disconnect and to enjoy life. I think there's so many, in my view, maybe this way from being in social work so long, admittedly, but when so many people have more than one job, or their job is 60 or 70 hours a week on a slow week, even if it's adequately meeting their basic needs, one of those basic needs I don't think it very often meets is that self-care, that time to, like as you spoke of, time to relax, time to engage our creative side, time to connect with other people. And I think, unfortunately, with the digital stimulation, I don't know that we're learning as well how to do basic regulation, like wait patiently. How many times we're in the grocery line and we don't have conversations with the other people. People are on their phones, or waiting. You see people waiting for their meals and on their phones, whereas before that would have been a conversation time and a downtime. And depending on how you curate what you see on those devices, unfortunately, a lot of negativity can be coming in through those through our eyes, and I feel like that has an effect on us.
Definitely does. Some of the things I think y'all mentioned wasn't said exactly this way, but black and white thinking. Jen, you touched on this. This polarization that occurs so much outside of us, so often occurs inside of us, and that keeps us from being emotionally regulated, keeps us from being calm. If the black and white thinking obviously is extreme, right? And I think Bob, you touched on fight or flight or freeze. It has everything to do with that, because what it does is remove nuance, and it's like, here's an enemy, here's a nail. Suddenly, I'm a hammer. It's like it just, and so often, I feel like in relationships, like say the relationship between the four of us, if one of us does something that the others don't understand, do we jump to a extreme thought? It's like Jasmine is always late because she doesn't care about this, and this is not important to her. Or, you're not, but I'm just saying as an example. Or an interpersonal relationship, it's like, my spouse never. First of all, we get in trouble right there, right, with the word never, but never picks up whatever, or never stays in touch like he promised he would, or whatever it is. As the observer, as the one responsible for the peace, for the calm, for the presence, I have to be aware of that. I have to be aware of, I want to be at the place where, even as Bob mentioned, even when that lizard brain has something to say, I want to be at the place where I'm observing and I'll question it. Does so and so always do that? Is that true? Do you think?
I got something here,
Okay.
and this came. So yesterday, my client and I've been seeing her for a number of years, and her and I just had this holy shit moment as we were doing some parts work, and it's related to this, and it gave me an insight that I'd never thought of. So we were. She's a 50-something-year-old woman. Been working with her for 5 or 6 years. Very sharp, bright, all the things. Very self-aware, and still processing and dealing with things from her past and trauma and loss and all that. So we were talking about kind of this critical voice, this part of her that is this critical, authoritarian, judgmental, black and white voice. And as we were kind of tuning into that, I start kind of getting curious about who is hearing this voice. Who is hearing this voice and who is responding to this voice? And so, the first thing she notices is this very young part of her that's like this 6, 7 year old that, if an authority says something, if the critic says something, if the parent says something, because that 6 year old, things are black and white. Developmentally,
Yeah.
5, 6 year old kid doesn't see gray, isn't able to see gray developmentally, intellectually, morally, whatever you want to call it. So, and then we were kind of tuning into a more adolescent part of her that's a lot, it's stronger, it's rebellious, and this 15-year old that, she, one of these main kind of parts that she connects to. And the 15-year-old have very different perspective about the critic and the critic's authority. And for the most part, it said, critic, fuck you. But she realized deep down there was still, oh God, maybe they're right. But maybe I do need that. Yeah. I should, or I'm supposed to, kind of that adolescent that's beginning to grow and become more malleable and is starting to see gray, right? And then I said, okay, we did this thing where I said, okay, I want that critic part of you is going to sit on the other side of what you're looking at, and then here next to you in each of your hands, you're going to hold one of these parts of you. And my idea at the time, or my hope at the time, was kind of seeing if we could help, especially this younger part, have a different perspective. And this is where kind of the insight came as we were going. And in my mind, I'm thinking, gosh, maybe we can help this 6-year-old come to see that, and the 6-year-old, no, it was just, no, it's good or it's bad, it's right or it's wrong. And then I thought, okay, maybe, and then this is just being creative. I said, I wonder if we can have the teenager and the 6-year-old kind of connect. And I wonder if the teenager that's a little closer to the 6-year-old can maybe help translate, so to speak. But still, for the 6-year-old, there was no difference. There was no difference. And that's when I was like, holy shit, the 6-year-old just can't.
Yeah.
That part of her wasn't capable of it. And it wasn't about her needing to stop flipping her lid or her stop. It's just, it wasn't capable. But what the kicker, and this is where you were talking about love, Michael, because in the hope as you're doing the IFS processing or a number of other approaches to therapy is that you're able to have some kind of connection to love. However you perceive that love, unconditional regard, acceptance, whatever, that you're able to help create a space where that love and acceptance can be experienced, not just here, right, but can be experienced, right? And in IFS, that's the presence of self. That is this accepting, loving self. And the idea is hopefully when we can facilitate connecting these younger parts of our clients to having a sense of what is us, right? Of course, that also includes us coming to have a sense of that, because so many of us, so me included, it's hard to get there because of all the layers. But the 6-year-old can't understand necessarily, conceptualize it like the teenager can, but the 6-year-old can feel the love and be embraced and have that healing.
Right.
And then that got me thinking, well, it brought me around, Christ's rule is love. And when we drive around here, and we drove to Texas and back last week, and especially between here and Texas, we're seeing all kinds of billboards about obeying and the ABCs of the Bible and all this, very black and white, literalist, young, developmentally way of looking at God.
Yeah.
Right. And then we know, well, I think we know that, Christ toppled that over because his rule was love. And there's a billboard here that we pass sometimes that was essentially, it talks about obey. It's somewhere on 231, and it's about the number one rule God said is obey. And, you must obey God. And I'm thinking, well, and that's true, but what, Christ said was obeying was loving. It wasn't about obeying. You must obey the rule of love first, which is, paradoxical to obeying. It's number one. So a long way around that is it got me to realize, and God, I probably, we all have parts of us that maybe can't understand.
Yeah.
And it's not about trying to help understand. As a therapist, of course, I want my clients to have insight and understanding and compassion. And maybe we all have parts of us that don't necessarily have the capability to understand, that are in certain past times experiences, but what they can do is experience love and acceptance and healing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.